The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild versus Mario Odyssey, two of the biggest releases of the year belonging to Nintendo, and many people are debating on which of these two games are Nintendo's Game of the Year. So this video is going to be my take on that. We'll talk about each games in their own separate parts, since I never did talk about them on the channel before, and I'll actually pick one as my personal winner between the two, so I won't cop out with a tie. Enjoy. Now, before I go on, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a huge Zelda fan, and that might honestly make me a bit biased here. Even if I also do love Mario, my favorite Zelda games are A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, with Breath of the Wild now being a new favorite of mine along those two. I loved Breath of the Wild to the point where I could actually say that I decided to 100% the game, which took me somewhere around 255 hours. The freedom to explore, the freedom in which you approach enemies, and the grand sense of adventure in this version of Hyrule was mind-blowing. The soundtrack was incredible, with fitting music everywhere, whether I was listening to soothing tunes walking through the Temple of Time, or the dramatic music played at Hyrule Castle when you approach it. It felt like there was things to see and people to help nearly everywhere, and I loved it. The level of things you could do was also incredible, like if I saw a camp of bokoblins, for example, I could sneak attack them, or just walk up to them and fight them with my sword. I could bomb them, or I could freeze them and push them off a nearby cliff. Stop time, throw a metal weapon at them so they can get struck by lightning, or do some really elaborate or unnecessary thing like tying an explosive barrel to a balloon, using a deco leaf to push it above the camp, and shooting the balloon with an arrow to blow them up in some sort of way to create the concept of artillery in Hyrule. All actual things I can do in any encounter, and it's honestly hilarious at times, and even epic at times too. The first couple of hours where you're really weak is also one of my favorite gameplay experiences ever, making me truly feel like I was surviving in the wild and slowly becoming the hero of legend. After I had completed the game, I truly felt that Zelda was my game of the year. But there was an issue. There was another game that was on the horizon that may challenge that notion. Okay, so if Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite Zelda games of all time, then know that Mario 64 was my favorite Mario game. And now, it's now my second favorite, with Mario Odyssey being my favorite Mario game. It really is that good to me. Now, I didn't really like Mario Sunshine, but loved 64 and Galaxy. The mobility options in Mario Odyssey is second to no other Mario game. There's so much you can do. You can do most of all the movement options from 64, but with Cappy, you can now extend some of them, and that means a lot. Instead of just doing a long jump to clear a long distance, you can now long jump, throw Cappy, dive, bounce off Cappy, throw Cappy again, and dive one more time. This covers so much more ground than Mario ever could before, and it's honestly amazing. You will start the game only doing the basics, but once you get used to the controls, you will start to create your own way of using these mobility options, and will play the game near the end completely different than how you started. It's fluid and it just feels natural. The worlds of Odyssey are all incredibly interesting, and so are the bosses. If I had to come up with any complaint with the game, it's mostly with how bosses are dealt with, and probably a few moons here and there. Most bosses are fought in a small confined arena, and with Bowser I'd be okay with that, but nearly every other one is fought the same way. For this reason, the boss of the Seaside Kingdom in particular is my favorite in the game, simply for using the entirety of the world. It's basically the exception to this. The moon complaint is simply how some are just sitting there with no real reason as to why. Some are literally just sitting at a spot waiting to be grabbed, and it felt lazy due to there being over 800 moons developers had to put into the game. These are extremely minor complaints, however, that didn't ruin my experience at all. The music in Odyssey are all amazing, with Cascade Kingdom and Metro being favorites of mine. Getting 100% completion in Mario Odyssey was also a ton of fun, and something I decided to do once I defeated Bowser at the end. It's not common that I go for that in a game, but I did it for both Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey. I never wanted these games to end, and went for that 100% completion simply so I could have more to do in it. And now, I think it's time for the verdict. Versus... Alright, it's honestly really hard to say. I deeply love both of these games, and they will easily be remembered for a very long time. However, if I absolutely had to pick one, it'd have to be The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I just felt that, despite both games being incredibly close to perfection, the tiny little bits of problems I had with Odyssey simply bothered me a tad bit more. So many fantastic games came out this year outside of Nintendo as well, like Persona 5 and Cuphead to name a few. But even including those, my game of the year would have to be Breath of the Wild. And while Breath of the Wild also has some minor problems that I can also agree with and acknowledge, they just didn't bother me as much. And mind you, Odyssey's problems don't bother me, but if I had to pick one, I'd pick Zelda. Alright, well, thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this at all, feel free to comment, assuming you don't hate my guts for not siding with Mario in this video. On to the next video. I'll talk to you guys next time. Later.